So there's a great deal of videos on YouTube that focuses on character design. However, what I quite often find is that the examples they use are from games like Hades or Ori. Undoubtedly great character design and great art, just perhaps not that applicable to a beginner who just wants to make decent characters for their game, be it enemies, bosses, or their own character. And so this is kind of a video for you. We're going to cover how I created these characters from start to finish. We'll cover this process from the planning stage and then to how you can actually draw your characters with silhouettes, proportions, and colors. And we'll start out with the planning stage. And step 1 in the planning stage is to figure out your setting, style, and theme. So this is something that becomes important before we even start drawing. Partly because it helps us figure out what we need to do, but also because it ensures we have cohesion among all our characters. So on its own, we could argue that this is a pretty bad character. It's not necessarily drawn properly, and it's kind of goofy. But if we add these characters around it, then we can kind of see that the goofiness is intentional. On the other hand, if my first character looked like this, my second like this, and my third like this, then you would rightfully question these characters. They might look okay individually, but not together. Basically, this is a better set of 3 characters than these. Ensuring that your art is cohesive is one of the most important things when creating nice art. And so, we need to start with it early, before we even draw. So the question becomes, how do we figure out our theme and setting? I try to ensure I've thought about 4 things. Number 1, what environment do my characters live in? Number 2, what genre of game am I making? What feelings do I want to invoke with my game? Number 3, what type of creatures or characters will I have in my game? And number 4, what are my stylistic constraints? So what is my art style? So for my game, I actually want my characters to have a kind of Ren Fair type of vibe. That's the environment that my characters live in. So this is kind of medieval, but in a fake way. So this character looks quite medieval. This looks kind of medieval, kind of not. And this looks really fake, like a modern scarf with a fake helmet. So now I have decided what environment my characters live in, and now I can move on to step number 2. What genre of game am I making? And what feelings do I want to invoke with this game? Well, I'm making a platformer, and I want my game to be kind of goofy and cute, and not take itself too seriously. And now, rather than moving on to step number 3, I want us to go back to step 1, and ask ourselves, does the environment we have decided on fit the vibe and feeling of the game I'm making? What I want you to recognize is that we made 4 criteria, and we can technically select each criteria individually, but I think it's important to not think of them separately. They all affect each other. If we make a medieval setting with a goofy vibe, well, we might get this. If we make a medieval setting with a more serious storybook vibe, we would perhaps make a game closer to Tales of Iron. And if we wanted a really dark and gloomy kind of vibe in our game, then we would end up with a more researched and gothic environment, like in Blasphemous. So it's important to not just select a thing, but really have something in mind. Because otherwise you might lose track of what the goal is, or you might overscope things. Blasphemous is cooler than whatever this is, but if you're making a goofy game, then a Ren Fair vibe is a better choice. Now we move on to step 3. What type of characters will I have in my game? And before you just pick a creature and move on, I think it's once again important to just ask yourself a couple of questions. Are you skilled enough to make a really cool human character, like in Hades? Or will your human characters look more like Salt and Sanctuary? So for me personally, this just comes easy. I'm used to drawing silly cartoon animals. A lot of the characters I'm drawing here, like these 2, are directly lifted from acrylic paintings I've made for my wife. But for you, this answer might be trickier. But I would say that the less humanoid you make it, the easier it will probably be to make as a beginner. So like the character in The End is Nigh looks nice, but is fairly easy to make. The characters in Candle is more humanoid and will be slightly trickier to make. And as we move towards very humanoid characters, like in Rogue Legacy and Itora, I frankly think you need to be a fairly skilled artist to pull it off. Just be honest with yourself. So I personally place myself here. So I want them to be in the semi-fake humanoid range that games like Candle occupy, and not realistic humanoid like in Rogue Legacy. And conveniently for me, this kind of improper humanoid, that is kind of a sack of potatoes with arms, is not just simpler to draw, it's also goofier. Which, if we recall, was the feeling I wanted to invoke. It's easy as a beginner to think that this is a scale where if you suck at art, you pick this, and the better you get, the more you move over to this. And the best artist would make Hades or Gris. But that is not how an artist would actually think. A good artist is not concerned with impressing you with their skill. They know that they're good already. They don't care that Gris is harder to make than Candle. They think, what genre am I making? What feelings do I want to invoke? And does this fit my game better? So if we look at this scale, I would place a game like Hollow Knight in between Rogue Legacy and Candle, Cult of the Lamb around Candle, and then a game like A Robot Named Fight is like squarely in the Hades range. Very humanoid. But the question is, would I say that the artist that made Robot Named Fight is a better artist than the artist behind Hollow Knight and Cult of the Lamb? Well, no, I don't think so. I would say that the artists behind Cult of the Lamb, Hollow Knight, and Hades are all S tier. They're just going for different things. This type of art is easier to make as a beginner, but it doesn't make your art worse. It all depends on the game you're making and the feeling you want to invoke. Do you want to impress people with your skills? Or do you want to make the goofiest game you can? If you want to optimize for impressing people, then go for something realistic. But if you want to make a goofy game like me, when we decide on the creatures we make, we go, okay, I want to make goofy animals, so I pick animals as if they were sacks of potatoes with arms. So now we move on to step number 4, stylistic constraints. So, what is your art style? This is something that will depend on the rest of your game. And at first, you might not really have an idea for an art style. At that point, just let it develop with time. But try and consciously mold it into a style that matches the game you're making. And here it can be important to sort of write down ideas and kind of define your art style by looking at other games and trying to figure out why a game style looks like it does. As an example, grittier and gloomier games tend to always draw thin and detailed, to almost invoke a kind of trypophobia, whereas goofier games tend to reduce detail and focus on bigger shapes and strokes. So I tend to have very simple designs, thick line art, and very few details, because those stylistic constraints match the games I'm trying to make. And I'm not trying to say here that suddenly because you use thin detailed art, you suddenly make horror. Just that is one of the constraints that horror games tend to consistently have. And the thicker, simpler design is something more goofier games tend to have. And rather than just telling you that this is the case, we can just look at my art. The ideas in these paintings are goofy, but it's so carefully rendered and detailed that the artistic qualities undermine the goofiness. Whereas for these paintings, there really is no artistic quality. It's just easily digestible goofiness. I have quite a detailed video going over the idea of stylistic constraints. But here I really want to stress a couple of things to make your style more cohesive. It becomes easier for Team Cherry, who made Silksong and Hollow Knight, to make consistent characters if they know, before they make a character, that all their faces are going to be kind of big black holes or big white holes. No nose, no mouth. Not every character fits this pattern, but most of them do. So whenever they make a new character, it'll almost immediately fit with the rest of their characters as long as they just slap 2 bigger holes on the character. Same goes for me. I have mostly small dots, with some eyebrows and a beak or a snout. It consistently gives the same vibe, so it becomes consistently quite easy to make my characters match. And I don't think it's inherently bad to actually literally save 10 facial expressions, and when you make a new character, you just slap one of your faces onto it. It obviously makes your game feel less organic, but it also naturally makes the process easier if your new character fits with predefined faces. The second stylistic constraint to be wary of is colors. I recommend for the most part to start with 3 colors, like here we have 1, 2, 3. Here we have 1, 2, 3. And then to make it even easier, you can actually keep the same 3 colors quite consistent across almost all of your characters. If my colors work once, then I don't need to reinvent a set of colors for every character. So it's not just trickier to reinvent something every time, but it also makes your game less cohesive. And obviously I'm not strictly always picking 3 colors, but I clearly have this yellow, cream, brown, red, green thing in the back of my mind when I'm making these characters. And I consciously avoid throwing in colors like magenta or blue. So there we have it. Now we are kind of done with the planning. So let's move on to drawing. Step 1, thumbnailing. And what thumbnailing means in art terms is that we make small images of our character design and don't really commit to anything. We just make tiny characters. And we make like 20 of these. And the main thing I'm thinking of here is if I can make the silhouette somewhat unique, then it's probably somewhat gonna be an okay character. A character can be okay without a perfect silhouette. We can look at some of the creeps in Hollow Knight. They're not perfect silhouettes, but they still work as characters. But we're more likely to like our character if it has a simple, readable design just from the silhouette. And when I'm creating here, I'm obviously thinking like, oh, this is the head. This is the body. These are the legs. This is maybe a sword. So I am thinking of how I'm designing my character, but I'm not committing with any lines. So it goes quick to draw before I start making details, because I don't want to make details with a crappy character. Now, one thing that I recommend when doing this is to already think, what do I want my character to be? Communicate the concept of the character. And the reason you're doing this, especially when making a game, is for gameplay reasons. So if you have an enemy with a lot of wind-up, you probably want to make it big and bulky. So here we have kind of a hammer maybe. The player will see big bulky, assume big wind-up, and that the character does a lot of telegraphing when making their moves. And if we want a character that's kind of agile, then we make it tinier, maybe pointier. As you want to keep this in mind, like, okay, what type of enemy character I'm making, or boss character, or your own character, and then make a character that kind of matches that dynamic, that kind of matches that gameplay. Similarly, if we make something like, I don't know, we're making a snail character here. This is our snail. When the player sees a snail, they might think, oh, this is like an idiot character. The character will hurt you, the enemy will hurt you, but it kind of ignores you. It doesn't really care about you, it just inadvertently hurts you. So similar to these types of enemies in Hollow Knight. Similarly, we might have an enemy with a spell, then the character might have a staff. Once we have a lot of characters, we might pick out a few that we like. So maybe we want to make this staff, maybe we want to make this bulky thing. This we don't really like, this maybe we don't really like. But we maybe like a few of these. And so we go further with those characters. One thing we can see here already with these silhouettes is I'm trying to push proportions. So here we have kind of a big character, but we can also imagine a really tiny character. This is our really tiny character. And the reason we want to really push proportions, make stuff really big or make stuff really small, it increases the chance that we make something truly random that might be really good. The second reason is that it's more engaging with a game that's not that samey. So our big bulky characters can be really big and bulky, and some other characters can be really small to contrast that. Now the main point I want to kind of press here is that regardless of your skill level, you will benefit from doing some type of silhouette. And the reason is simple. It makes you get some ideas for your characters out very quickly. If you don't like the idea of a black silhouette like this, then you can still draw characters. But you should make sure not to zoom into the characters in order to avoid detailing or overworking something. So set a time limit where you draw something like 20 characters, but where you aren't really allowed to spend more than 10 minutes on each character, or 5 minutes, in order to at least try drawing lots of things quickly. And I say 10 minutes if you're really slow at drawing. Personally, I would give myself something like a 2-minute limit. But you see the principle here. We have a set of shapes or silhouette. We pick out the ones we like and we move on to the next step. Step 2 is outlining. So I want us to go ahead and start with one of these characters. We'll start with this one. So we kind of like this one. So we'll copy it and then we'll paste it. At this point, since it's all in black, we maybe want to go a bit brighter. And now we tend to work with line art in order to sort of hone in on the details. So here we have a kind of bunny character maybe. So maybe something like a bunny. When we're doing this, I do recommend flipping the canvas horizontal and back. You can see that this looks really off, and we notice this because we're flipping the canvas. So maybe we go back in, erase this. We can even take the marker tool and warp it slightly. So we're moving it back, getting it more centered, and then we redo our line. And now it's slightly more accurate if we flip back. And at this point, we could even continue working on this, or we can let it sit and come back to it. I recommend coming back to it. And the reason why we want to come back to it is simple. It's really easy to sit and overwork something that's not good. As I said earlier, throw stuff at the wall, don't commit early on. So now we maybe pick this character, this big one. So we select, copy it, go into a new canvas, paste it, increase the brightness, and start outlining this character. So maybe this is a silly bird with a silly wing. The character maybe has a vest on him. These big shoulder pads, a big hammer. None of this is good. The lines themselves aren't good. We don't care at this stage. You see how quick I did this? We don't need to commit to making nice lines because nice lines take time. We commit to getting the idea out there. This is a big bulky bird. It's kind of ugly, but we get the idea. We maybe flip the canvas a bit. See, okay, this is a bit too skewed. The head is a bit too forward maybe. Maybe we want to warp the head a bit. Maybe we don't like how the beak was. Maybe the beak like this is better. Maybe we want to put big eyebrows on him to make him look even more angry or mad. Maybe you want to change the shape of the head a bit to make it a bit more square. Ballparks of the character. Do we like this design? Maybe, maybe not. If we start to like this, then we can improve it. Perhaps, even at this stage, if we're like, yeah, this could actually work, maybe we can throw on some colors, just to get a sense of it. But we do this really quickly and roughly for one simple reason. We don't want to spend time polishing a turd. Maybe we notice that we don't want the axe to be behind him, and he's not even holding it at the moment. Since we noticed he's not holding it, we go back and we make him hold it. Now he's holding it. What I want you to notice here is that this doesn't look good. Even though I can draw moderately well, it still doesn't look good, and that's fine. We're only trying to get ourselves to kind of see something that works. Like the idea of this character perhaps works. Maybe there's something here we can polish. So now that we really have an idea for our characters, we move on to step 3, anatomy. Now if you read a book on anatomy or watch a video on anatomy, you'll often see something similar to this. Here we're like barely drawing a head anymore. We're just constructing pretty advanced boxes. I don't follow this approach. So that's not the process I'm going to cover. What I'm going to describe in terms of anatomy is really more a very loose form of something called constructional drawing. So my characters don't have human anatomy, so I don't need to know that anatomy. This is not human. But if my character is shaped like a sphere stuck on a beehive, then it's helpful if I understand how to construct a sphere and a beehive. And that's the anatomy that we're going to focus on. When you're making a character, I don't want you to make it more complex, more advanced, more anatomical than just having a sense for where things are in a three-dimensional space. If this character was 3D, how would this character look? And the idea for that is that maybe the character is kind of like a bullet. And so the nose is kind of like here, the beak. The eyes are kind of like here on this spherical object. This arm, this starts here, pushes a bit forward like that, and maybe has something on his back. And then he has his other arm is maybe like that, and he has a shield in front of it. His legs are 2 tubes in that. It's not really anatomy in that sense, because I'm making a bullet. No person is a bullet. No animal is a bullet. But in my world, my character is kind of bullet shaped, and so he looks kind of like this. Maybe we don't want to make a bullet. Maybe we want to make like a beehive kind of shape. And so we get the sense of like, oh yeah, this is what's going on. If you imagine these lines are behind, this is in front. That's the kind of round shape that I imagine when I'm drawing. Maybe we don't want to make a bullet. Maybe we want to make something closer to this. Like maybe it's like a bulge on top of the beehive. And then once again, a bee. If you're bad at art, I don't think anatomy should be that more complex than this. Just have an idea in mind when drawing. This is the type of shape or the 3D object I'm creating. That if you look at something like this character, it's not complex at all. All I'm doing is what I said earlier. I'm imagining kind of this round shape, like a tube, and then I'm kind of imagining, oh, on this tube, the eyes would be around here. Extremely simple character design. It's not anatomical in the traditional sense, but it's sensible given the world we imagine them living in. And so maybe this is a wing, and maybe he has another wing here, and maybe he has a haircut. And since he's a bird, maybe he has a tail. Not perfect art. It's not Hades. It's kind of cute or kind of scary or kind of in between both. And we take simple shapes, just understand what those simple shapes are and where our eyes are on that simple shape. And we add that simple shape together, funny faces. Simple shape, funny face, some funky clothes, and a staff. Add all of these together and voila, we have a character. Not a crazy character, but it is a character good enough for a game. As you just saw, my guidelines for the 3D shape I'm imagining is not clean. It's messy. It's not a final product. These lines only exist for me to get a sense of the thing I am creating. So it should not be clean. If it is clean, I'm probably wasting time cleaning it up. And as mentioned earlier, I generally don't recommend that you go for advanced anatomy in your game art. There are situations where a solo developer does it and executes on it really well. Ghost Song is one such example. But by and large, I think the sack of potato approach is more appropriate. It tends to be faster, it tends to require less technical knowledge, and it often becomes easier to invoke emotions or play with your themes. So if you want to practice this idea of anatomy, there are still a few shapes that can be helpful to get familiar with. Boxes, spheres, and cylinders. But as noted, I don't think you should necessarily draw these spheres or cylinders, but just like have a sense for the types of 3D shape that you can use to create your character. Now that we have covered anatomy, we move on to step number 3, refining our design. Now a big thing I want you to avoid when making your character is not to overload it with ideas. We're not overloading it with ideas for 2 reasons. Number 1, everything we draw, we also have to animate. It's gonna be annoying, it's gonna look bad. Number 2, we're not good enough to make details work. If we keep it simple, keep 1 idea or 2 ideas that work, that's enough to get a reaction out of the player, a positive reaction. If you overload it with a lot of details or a lot of stuff, you're not making the 2 things that are good shine. The details will obscure the good stuff. And the good stuff in this character is that he's bulky, he's angry, and he's gonna hit you hard. And so maybe we just give him a funny little vest. Not much more than that. What we want to focus on is the angry face, that he's kind of squarish, and that he has a hammer. If we want to later, we can perhaps add some details onto the hammer, but we don't start adding stuff here, like a, I don't know, necklace or something. It's like, it's unnecessary. We don't need it. It's just gonna waste time and not make the character look better. Because the necklace isn't what makes this character. It's this stuff, that stuff, and this shape. Those are the things that we should value. So here we have a simple idea. We have a character that perhaps wants to ram into the player. He has a goofy face, a crown, but not much more details. We just focus on 2 things that work. Same thing. Maybe this is a flying monster, a flying owl. If you want to add something funny or goofy, we just add 1 thing. This guy gets glasses. That's his fun thing. Funny face. This guy gets a shield. Once again, tubular shape. We're not making advanced anatomy. He gets arms, cute face. He gets a thing, hat, and then his weapon. Once again, simple idea, silly face, a method of attack. I tried to get the personality in it. So this is like a cuddly big bear that wants to shoot you. And I don't make too many frills, at least not initially. I don't add that much. I found that an idea worked once, so I'm reusing it. 1 or 2 ideas thrown onto a character. And they're all aiming at the same thing. To make something kind of cute that can make you kind of laugh. So now that we have refined our design and we like it, we would obviously move on to polishing. But before you do that, I actually recommend that you just don't for a while, like 2 months. Because what you'll often find is that you'll change your mind on things, or you'll get better at art. And if you've spent time polishing before you're actually finished, you just go back, change things, and then have to polish it again. Which meant that that initial polishing stage was just a waste of time. But we're still gonna cover it. So step number 4, polish. So as I said, polishing is something we do have to do eventually, but I'm going to illustrate my process for polishing, which is different than others. And I'm also going to explain why I do it like this. So I want us to take this character and finish it. So if we imagine that this character is gonna fit into my game. You take this character, pull up your game character. So we're pulling it up here. We're redrawing this using our game character as a reference. You might be going, wait, these are not the same. No. But we're referencing the style that we're using for our main character. We're making sure that this fits together with that. So we take this and we don't make this one overly feathery if our main character isn't. And overall, as I said earlier, don't add too many details because you're gonna have to animate it. And as you can see, we're really just cleaning stuff up. And so now we compare from this to this. And I will say, sometimes what you end up with is that your new version kind of lost the spark of the previous version. It often means that you made some unintended change when you redrew it. But let's carry on. And don't be afraid to just skip something you've drawn before and redraw it. So if we look at our character now, we can see he has some spots and stuff like that. And I'm drawing each of these things on a separate layer. And the reason I'm doing this is because I want to be able to texture them separately. Okay, so now we have something. I'm adding alpha lock. I'm just picking this color, making it a bit darker, picking a slightly different color, making some textures, doing the same for this. And since we're dealing with yellow here, we can maybe add some shadows even, maybe some highlights up here, pushing a bit to orange to get some color variation. We do the same thing for the handle. What I want to stress here is that even though you might like your character really much, or like this very much, it's important that these two match. So you might have to rework both of them in combination. And then when you get your third character, you rework all of those in conjunction. Now, as mentioned before, I'm just showcasing how polishing might look. I will have to redo all of this in MOE eventually. But what I wanted to showcase was two things. Number one, I can't draw this thing in isolation. I do actually need to have a good idea of how the rest of my characters look when I work on my characters. If I don't, then I waste time. The second thing I kind of want to stress is just to be mindful of how long your polishing stage takes. For me, I don't think polishing a character should take you more than 20 to 30 minutes. Probably even less. These are 17 characters in total. If each took an hour to polish, that would be 17 hours in polishing our character. That's not to mention the time it takes to come up with the characters to begin with, or animating the characters. If you have a rigging software, it can make sense to do textures and stuff, like my main character. But if I would do frame by frame animation, I would keep my character with this type of rendering, like my channel mascot. So all in all, I don't think you should make the process more complex than this. As parting advice, you have to accept that you might not get the best results immediately. This is most likely not a lack of talent. For most of us, I think we create boring stuff because we don't really have the knowledge of how we can push things to make them engaging. So I do recommend, like, not necessarily buying books, but look up Instagram accounts or artists that you kind of find cool. Because you'll see really cool characters and how they are pushing things. And then you learn to push things yourself. You're not gonna make as nice art as some of the artists that you might like, but you'll make better than what you did before. It'll take time before you get anything, but once you get something, repeat it. Thanks for watching. Bye.